Today, Bitcoin and Ether sink more than 5% to kick off the month of August. Coinbase's David Duong explains what's driving crypto's sell-off. And Valerie Kennedy of Chainalysis breaks down a new report on malign interference in crypto. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. Cryptocurrencies tracking lower alongside a broad sell-off on Wall Street. By noon Eastern, Bitcoin tumbled more than 5% to the $62,000 level. Ether dropped more than 5.5%, now down to the $3,100 level. And XRP sank more than 9% to 59 cents. That drop from Ripple's token comes despite an announcement from the issuer today that tokenization platform OpenEden will bring tokenized treasury bills to the XRP ledger. Taking a look at Bitcoin miners, all are in the red as of around 12:30, with Riot falling more than 2% after disappointing Q2 results. The Bitcoin miner reported second quarter earnings yesterday, showing losses widened to more than $84 million as costs surged. Of course, the Bitcoin halving took place in April when the reward for mining was cut in half, and that added pressure on miners. Okay, sticking with markets, I spoke with David Duong, head of institutional research at Coinbase, about what we can expect as the new month kicks off. All right, David, thank you so much for joining us today. We are kicking off what is typically kind of a sleepy trading month, not just for Bitcoin, but for risk assets more broadly. If we could look back at July for a little bit, it did finish well. Of course, the month before that, not so great. But what did you make of the trading month for July? What were some of your key takeaways, especially, takeaways that we'll be bringing through into August with us?
Yeah, I think July was really focused on the supply overhangs in this market. And we saw with Bitcoin in particular, for example, the German government selling Bitcoin in a rather indiscriminate way, which I think kind of created some volatility for market players who didn't know how to really respond to that. But we also had Mt. Gox selling that really initiated in early July. We've now seen that around 40% of that has at least gone to the exchanges. We don't have a lot of transparency on if anyone is actually selling that away. But I think that some of those supply overhangs as we get into the beginning of August have started to abate.
We had the Fed meeting yesterday, and I think it went exactly as most people expected it. What was your reaction to that, and what does that tell you about where things are headed in the next few weeks?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think macro has had less of an influence over crypto prices very recently. It's still relevant, however. And we've kind of made this point in the past, but the Fed decision doesn't exist in a vacuum, which is to say that in an ideal situation, rate cuts would unlock liquidity and be very supportive for long-duration assets like crypto. But it also depends on how is the economy doing at the moment. And if the perception is that the economy is weakening, for example, if we were headed into recession, which I don't think we are, but if we were, I think that would keep retail customers from perhaps deploying more capital here than they would otherwise. So I think that's what's relevant here. It's not just what the Fed's decision is, but is the economy doing well? And I think that some of the data that we got today, for example, seems to suggest that it's more likely that we could see a downturn. Now, I think that we've already seen the economy peak, and so I'm more optimistic that when the Fed starts cutting rates beginning in September, that's going to be very supportive for crypto. But I think that there's a very large gap between what people think is going to happen here.
ETFs, another key theme. So we saw ETH ETFs in July. Tell me about what that looked like to you in terms of the market reaction compared to what it looked like when we got Bitcoin ETFs in January, and how you expect that to change over August and in the second half of the year.
Yeah, I think a really good point to mention about the ETH ETFs is that the conditions in which the ETH ETF launched are different from the ones that we saw with Bitcoin. And, that sounds super sensible, obviously. But, we saw that even within how the ETFs for ETH were launched compared to Bitcoin, there are a lot of small differences here. For example, the outflows coming from Grayscale's ETH, I think, have been front-loaded compared to what we saw with the Bitcoin the Bitcoin ETF launch, predominantly because in the case of Bitcoin, we saw that there were several large entities who were restricted from selling their GBTC shares until they were approved by the courts. That's not the case with ETH. There are fewer entities who actually have those same circumstances, so they were not blocked from selling it early on. So I think that's one thing that we're getting. ProShares got their ETF application approved, but they didn't get to launch. And they're one of the largest holders in terms of people who hold their futures ETH ETF. So that transition away from futures in spot also didn't necessarily happen in the same way it did with Bitcoin. So I think that there are those kinds of small nuances that people aren't considering. 21 Shares and ARK, for example, like 21 Shares went on this ETH ETF alone. So ARK, for example, included their Bitcoin ETF inside of many of their other funds. That didn't necessarily happen with the ETH ETF. I do think that once you see a lot of those issues kind of clear up, actually ETH looks very attractive as far as its performance over the last week, and B, what I would suspect the flows are going to look like in the weeks ahead.
Between now and the election, it does kind of feel like all of the, big overtures are kind of behind us now. And that the focus is a little bit more on legislation, which, nothing may happen there in an election year. So politics and the election as a catalyst for the crypto market, how much weight do you give that right now?
Yeah, we actually wrote a report where we were kind of break down a lot of the driving factors over the first half of 2024. And one of the omissions we had was politics, because we do suspect that the U.S. elections are going to be a major factor for crypto performance in the second half of the year. We just didn't know that it was going to happen so soon. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which you've kind of already enumerated. But I would suspect that now that crypto is becoming more of a bipartisan issue, and we're seeing that it's not just Trump's and Cynthia Lummis speaking at the Bitcoin Nashville conference, for example, but it's also the DNC considering changing their stance on crypto and putting something in there in their statement about crypto. So we're seeing that on both sides of the aisle. There are a lot of discussions about how do we approach this topic. So I think that crypto is fast becoming an election issue, which I think is really good for the space. And I think that we'll probably see over the course of the second half of the year that it'll remain a likely driver for it. Now, I think it could kind of, oscillate back and forth. That's really kind of hard to predict because politics by nature is kind of hard to predict. But I do think that for the most part, it's going to be a positive for the space.
All right, for our main story, Chainalysis released a new report last week on harmful interference in crypto. In the past few years, malign foreign state and non-state actors have conducted systemic influence campaigns to try and interfere with democratic processes. Chainalysis notes that historically, these activities are most impactful in the run-up to elections. With much of the world's population set to hold national elections this year, Chainalysis published the new report, which takes a look at how groups behind malign interference and misinformation campaigns fund their operations using crypto. Crypto World's Talia Kaplan spoke with Valerie Kennedy, the blockchain analysis firm's director of investigations, about the report's findings and why the revelations are more important now than ever before.
So Chainalysis published a comprehensive report last week on how groups behind malign interference and disinformation campaigns fund their operations using crypto. I want to start off by asking, what is the role crypto plays in facilitating these campaigns around the world? Your research notes that while the spread of misinformation is not new, government agencies have observed novel tactics that are being employed to facilitate these campaigns. And after going through your report, I take it these methods involve crypto. So could you take us through some of those tactics?
Indeed. So just like traditional finance, cryptocurrency is being utilized as a tool in the disinformation ecosystem. So that can look like a number of things. One, it can look like cryptocurrency being utilized to actually fund disinformation campaigns, whether it's disinformation outlets soliciting cryptocurrency donations or malign actors paying for disinformation utilizing crypto. And the third way is disinformation campaigns paying for infrastructure utilizing cryptocurrency.
For some context, Chainalysis uses on-chain data to trace crypto transactions to identify fraudulent and illicit activity involving digital assets. So how can crypto tracing identify these interference networks? How do analysts use crypto transaction tracing to expose and disrupt these efforts?
That's a great question. So because cryptocurrency is inherently built on inherently transparent technology, we can actually turn to that technology to help us understand these networks better. So blockchain analytics helps us better understand the people, places, and things underlying disinformation outlets. So for example, we can connect different outlets that we think might be connected to one another using blockchain technology. We can see how these things are being paid for, and we can even understand where these actors are then going to cash out proceeds. So utilizing blockchain analytics, we can understand these networks in a way we never were able to previously.
So why do you think this kind of report is important, especially now? Do you think all the elections taking place around the world this year, including the upcoming presidential election in the US, plays into the report's importance?
So certainly because this is the largest election year in a very long time, we wanted to ensure that we're highlighting the role that cryptocurrency plays in this type of election interference. I wouldn't say that cryptocurrency is necessarily the key facilitator behind these campaigns, but it does make it easier, cheaper, and faster to pay for this type of activity, just like other emerging technologies. And on the other hand, as I mentioned previously, it also allows us to better illuminate and understand these networks.
So can you take us through some examples of disinformation campaigns with a crypto element?
Certainly. So a very recent example was just published by the DOJ a few weeks ago, and it involved the takedown of 968 FSB-backed X accounts. And the role that crypto played in this is really payments for infrastructure. So in order to create these X accounts, the FSB was using cryptocurrency to pay for domains. Those domains allowed them to register email addresses, which were then used to create X accounts. So basically, cryptocurrency helped pay for the underlying infrastructure that helped facilitate this activity.
So how can this issue be resolved? What are some of the solutions Chainalysis uncovered? And how is Chainalysis helping to investigate this? Are you potentially working with government and law enforcement agencies to try and cut down on these potential misinformation campaigns?
So the best way to understand and prevent and disrupt disinformation campaigns is really shedding light on the fact that they are happening, and also better facilitating their disruption. So that includes the tactics and techniques that are utilized to run these campaigns, to include the payments underlying them. And so while I can't comment on ongoing investigations with our customers, I can say that Chainalysis is taking this very seriously. We're taking a really diligent approach in helping uncover this type of activity and helping better illuminate it to our customers.
And are there any steps that governments can take to track down this kind of activity? What would you recommend? And are governments taking steps already to try and crack down on this kind of interference?
Yes. So as we're seeing this type of interference increase, we're also seeing governments ramp up their efforts across different types of disruption techniques. So that can include counter messaging. It can include better cyber prevention, data protection. And then, of course, the other is also blockchain analytics. So understanding how these networks are operating, working to disrupt them. Blockchain analytics helps us take a better approach to being able to do that.
What would you say is the main takeaway from this report?
The main takeaway from this report is twofold. One, cryptocurrency plays a role in disinformation campaigns and other types of malign interference worldwide. And similarly, because of the inherent transparent nature of cryptocurrency, that also leaves us with a hopeful note. So that means that we can better understand and disrupt these campaigns.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.